Jim, perhaps can you just introduce yourself just for a minute and perhaps give us a little brief history of your current company, and then perhaps we'll go back to the original Miller company.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Simon, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to your audience. I'm Jim Miller. I founded a business called Miller Capital Partners. I'm the first generation in that business, but I'm also the fifth generation in a bigger kind of Miller industrial history, which goes back to the 1860s, and which I'd like to talk a bit more about as well. My current business is a finance business, and we have a concentration in the family office market where we have built a substantial network over the years, serving large European families and helping them find attractive investment opportunities.
Thank you. And one of the things we're fascinated, which perhaps we'll talk about more, is how you got certain inspiration, understanding from your, I think your great-grandfather who started the company, and how that flows down to you today. So perhaps we can just go back a little bit. Can we get an understanding of your great-grandfather's company and what it did, and some of the history of that?
Okay, yeah, by all means. So my great-grandfather was a plumber in Lübeck. He was German, and he was involved in the Schleswig-Holstein conflict as part of the Lübeck infantry in the 1850s. And he was on the losing side, and there was something about him being tricked somehow by his family. And we've got some letters, some correspondence going back to those days. But to cut a long story short, he moved from Germany, left his family behind, and he moved to Wolverhampton, which I guess, close to Birmingham, was the manufacturing hub of the empire, and really if you were a plumber, it was the centre of the world in the 1850s. He lived on a barge, and he set up a business called H. Miller and Company, making bicycle lights, parts, accessories. He filed a couple of patents, and he retired a gentleman with kind of factories, 9 children, and a successful career, I suppose. It was the immigrant's dream, I suppose. He arrived in the UK with nothing and retired a wealthy man. But it was really his sons who built the business up. They both came straight into the business. They filed between them about 50 or 60 patents. They were major industrialists at that time. They took the business public, and they really kind of they forged a worldwide concern, and they were extremely dynamic industrialists. And then we see a bit of a tailing off in the third generation. I think it became a bit more of a lifestyle generation under my grandfather and my great uncle. It continued to be a major business, but the number of patents was in decline, the number of new products was in decline. I think there was increasing foreign competition, and the stories about that generation are less about their industry and more about the good times. And there's some very funny, some great stories about those guys. But it's a colourful generation rather than a hard-working generation.
Perhaps you want to, because we're always interested in colourful stories. Give us an interesting story. I remember you told me a couple. It was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean one. So Uncle Morris, my great Uncle Morris, was running the business, and there was some great stories about Uncle Morris. And there was one. My dad, when he was running the business, he went to Athens, and in those days you'd arrive by plane, and you walk down the steps, and you'd be greeted on the tarmac by whoever was waiting for you. And so the local representative for Miller's was on the tarmac, and he said, "Very nice to meet you, Mr. Michael. Not nearly as spectacular an arrival as the last time we had someone out from Miller's." And Dad said, "Oh, really? What happened?" So it turns out that Morris had been on the plane, and they'd been delayed. He started drinking at Heathrow, and by the time he got to Athens, he was properly drunk. And the Greek rep was waiting on the tarmac, and he says the door opened, and before they put the steps up to the plane, Morris walked out and fell flat on his face on the tarmac. And they took him to hospital and sorted him out, and he went back with a broken arm. Didn't tell a soul what had really happened. I think he said he'd slipped down some steps. And I mean, this is one of many, many stories of just of the good times that they were having. I suppose it was a leisure business at that point. They were enjoying themselves, and I guess they started drinking as well. That was probably also a part of the picture.
So we're now though coming to, I assume, sort of the third generation. They're I'm not going to, assess them clinically and say they're alcoholics, but it sounds like they were having a good time. They were drinking a lot. In my book, I talk about the fact that how we get brought up literally molds and shapes our brain. We call it neuroplasticity. And one of my major points is that as people grow up in a life of plenty, they actually form different neural pathways to when you grow up in a world of starvation, or if you grow up in a world of limited financial means. And it actually creates very different models within one's mind. Obviously people are individual, and there are individuals obviously that are third or fourth generation that will have a slightly different model, but overall, we do find that this is a good generalization. As it happens, it seems to fit with what happens. So in the third and fourth generations, can you explain a little bit about perhaps what happened and what started to happen to the company?
Yeah, I mean, everything I've got is hearsay, really. I mean, most of it from my dad. Right. And I suppose, I've looked at the patent registrations and I've seen a clear decline there.
Right.
And I've looked at the product mix and I've seen a clear decline there.
Right. So there's a lack of creativity and innovation.
Yeah, that's very objective.
Right.
The tail end of the business really were about Chinese competition, really.
Right.
And about their inability to face that competition and address it.
So, talking about the past, it's obviously a story. We talk about rags to riches in every culture, and it's a story that your family, your great grandfather, started the business. Didn't have much. He started sounds like a relatively small business, but then your great grandfather, built the business and made it. In our terminology, he would be the G1 person, generation one who made a big business. Then your father would have been, your grandfather would have been G2, and your father would have been G3. So perhaps you can just talk a little bit about the impact perhaps on the family that you experienced, as for lots of reasons beyond, I assume, that your father's influence, as you're talking about globalization, changing the world, and what the generation above did to the business, how it impacted on perhaps your business and then your family as this sort of tail off started to happen.
Yeah, I think it was a very important current in my life, really. I was born in 1970. The business was kind of sold. The family lost control of the business in the late 70s when I was about 8 or 9.
Right.
And then it was eventually closed down in the 1980s when I was about 12 or 13. But I think, the first point is that from a very early age, I think I felt a real sense of ownership around that business, even from that sort of age.
Wow. Okay.
And I think I grew up feeling that if I'd had a chance to be involved in the business, that I would have found a way through.
Right.
And so I kind of had this restitution agenda from a very early age. So that's been just, part of my psychology, for better or for worse. I don't know whether that's a good thing or not, but it's something that I've had, that I've grown up with. I think I've been more risk averse than I might have been otherwise, because I saw the consequences of the end of a family dynasty. Right. And I felt that in my bones. And I saw what happened to my family. It was very, there was a tragic end to the story. It was very impactful. It was very, it was, my dad carried a lot of shame. I think he took it all very personally. And it led to a lot of difficulties in the family. Right. No, so that was, so I think I do feel it on a very, very deep level. Right. And I've recently started looking at some of the psychological blocks that I have around money, because I think in order to build a really big business, I need to let go a bit more. Yep. And I've gone for quite a kind of conservative and risk-averse route. I've been mainly a one-man band. I haven't taken on too many people. I've kept things, under control. I've taken on things that I know I can do. And very, very choosy about how I do business. Who I do business with. I haven't wanted to make mistakes. And so that's been served me well in a way to get me onto the ladder. And I've built a good, solid franchise. But I think I probably also need to take more risks myself now.
So taking on that idea of, that we are influenced by our childhood, and that does shape an awful lot of our, at least unconscious behaviour, becoming into adults. How have you perhaps interacted with your children about telling them about Miller, about what you do? How have that sort of, because one of my big goals is to try and break this pattern, and again, as I said before, one has to become conscious of the various things before, one can, change it. So I wonder whether or not how that has impacted and how you've interacted with your kids in terms of, they're now 6th generation, and your sense of what you hope for them.
It's such a good question. I mean, they grew up so quickly.
They do.
And, if I'm really honest, I feel like I've been struggling with myself all the time. Before I know it, bang, my kids are adults.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think
my oldest is 20.
My oldest is 18. So, the first thing I'd say is for me, it's about know yourself. I mean, it's about trying to figure out, trying to get my own life under control and to set some kind of example for them. I try and parent them with healthy boundaries and with unconditional love, and I try and be the best parent I can for them.
Have you told them about the history of your family?
I think in bringing it back for myself, I'm bringing it back for them as well.
Right. So, taking all this fascinating conversation together, and thank you for this morning. It's been really interesting, and really to see, the whole, experience living, is really important. And if I may say, so to tell our stories is really important. We need to know where we come from and where we're going and who we are. Figure out, for ourselves. I try not to give any answers to everyone. I think everyone needs to come up with their own answers. But certainly we need to grapple with these questions and come up with, well, how are we going to live? How are we going to bring up our kids? What are we going to use the money for?
Well, I'd want them to develop their own sense of independence and faith in their own abilities first. And then if they decide at the end of that what they really want to do is take over a family business, then,